This is Fountain
Every
Street
week I find
Church.
it hard to find the best ones, but somehow, like I said, you'll hear what I'm trying to say even when the words
Here,
are...
we strive to free the mind, grow the soul, and change the world. Here, there is freedom to doubt and freedom to believe. Here, you can find a house of prayer for all people.
The swallow up Jonah.
Welcome to Fountain Street Church. Join us on the journey.
Well, it was not a quiet week in our little Lake Wobegon here. Somewhere north of 6,000 people have been in this place in the last week to see all the art prize stuff. It's been wonderful, but if you ask our building staff, they're a little tired. So be nice to our building folks. They've been putting on extravagant amounts of work and doing a wonderful job. And of course, you've heard about Pledge-a-Palooza, and there's really serious food in there, so do not go without eating it. For those who were not close by to the building, I was at an event on Wednesday evening to celebrate the creation or the dedication of the statue of Rosa Parks downtown, right on the Circle, of which we are a sponsor, Fountain Street Church. We should be very glad of that. I went to O'Hare Airport twice this week, came back twice too, so I've seen a lot of the city of Chicago, saw both of my children. It was a good week. But unlike Mae West, who said too much of a good thing can be wonderful, I have had more than my share of good times this week. I'm tired. That's why I can hear the wisdom of Jeremiah. It is good that one should wait quietly for the voice of God. Sometimes a little pause is good, which is one of the reasons you come. We're all caught in the routine of day to day, and this is a place where you can pull aside and be present just as a person. It's a powerful and important role, an important place, an important time, which is why, as I say almost every week, whether you hear it or not, I treat this time very seriously as an effort to go heart to heart with you. And I remember those words from the Psalm, "May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, O thou who art my rock and my redeemer." A prayer not asking for magic, certainly, but for patience from you and kindness, that what I say strikes a note somewhere in you that awakens something. This month, Matthew and I are spending time with one story that we're going to look at from a number of different angles. One story, a text, if you want to call it that, but it's a story. The story of Israel in the wilderness. It's a really long story. We're not going to go at it chapter and verse, certainly. It takes up most of the Torah, by the way. And why this story, you might ask? Well, in part because all sorts of stories form and inform us. Whether we know them or not directly, they help to form the culture we're in. America itself saw itself as being the new Israel in the new wilderness when the Europeans came over here, and they automatically imagined that they were like the children wandering in the desert, and those images became part of the way the Puritans and the Pilgrims and other religious groups in particular saw their presence here in the United States. They're embedded in our culture, so much so that the scholar Sidney Mead wrote a book entitled "The Nation with the Soul of a Church," one that saw itself as on a mission, having something to do more than simply protect a piece of land or preserve a certain religious way of life or even a particular language. We were on our way somewhere through a wilderness, both literal and figurative. But now I want you to take a fresh look at the story itself a little bit, because I want you to notice something, if you haven't before, that the story of Israel in the wilderness is about how it took 40 years to walk 300 miles. Now, admittedly, one should not expect children to go very fast, but I shouldn't think it would take 40 years to go 300 miles. They had a camel or two. Probably a couple of carts. Why did they take so long? Well, there are lots of explanations, but one possible answer, it's the one I want to start with today, was that by the time they got where they were going, to the land of Canaan, which they were about to go in and take possession of, was that only a handful of people who arrived at Canaan were alive when they left Egypt. For most of the people in the story, the only thing they ever knew was homelessness. The only life the children, people of 10, 20, 30 years old ever knew was living in a tent, wandering from place to place. Homelessness was the way they defined themselves. And I thought about this and realized, as I spoke in the early service as well, that every one of us has left home at least once. And every one of us has, in fact, left the same home and then went on to others. It took a while for people to figure out that first home. But if I remember, Pearl Buck in her book, The Good Earth, tries to assuage a young person of the fear of death by pointing out that when that young person was about to be born, that they resisted being born as much as we resist dying. And the whole point is to remember that wherever we are, we resist going forward. But the other point is that we all have the same common biological home inside a woman. And that we all have to leave that home. That we are, from that point forward, moving through life from one home to another. And I'm sure some of you grew up right here in Grand Rapids, some of you may even be living in the same house where you grew up, and yet I'm telling you, you have been homeless in some ways your whole life. And that's part of what I want to lift up as our essential homelessness. Even Jeremiah said that, the thought of my affliction and my homelessness. I want you to think of the places in which you have been and maybe still are homeless. You were born, you left the womb. Most everyone doesn't remember that, although I've had a couple of people tell me they have. But then perhaps you went off to college. Now, my son is only in East Lansing, go Green. 4-0, go with that. And as long as the Wolverines are doing well, I wish us all merriment. Next week, not so much. But he left home last year. And admittedly, he's only 50 miles away, but now he has to live by himself. And that threw me back to the moment when I went away to college, which was not 50 miles away, but rather more like 400 miles away, and it was in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, some of you didn't go away to college, but maybe you went off to the armed services, maybe you just took an apartment, but do you remember, you must remember a moment when you cut yourself free or were cut free from an environment that you could depend on, where the food was and the laundry was, where there were walls and a kind of welcome. What did Carl Sandburg or Robert Frost say? That home is the place where when you knock, they have to let you in. But you have to go out first to know where that place is. So you have to be a little bit homeless to know about home. And I can remember moving into my dorm room down in St. Louis, Missouri, a town I'd never been to before. And I'm the first one out of the nest, the oldest of four. So it was new for my parents as well. And there came a moment when they had to go. And I could barely control myself. In fact, I couldn't. My mother couldn't, certainly. My father, he manfully held his own. And then 30 years later, was it 30 years? No. Yes. I'm doing the same thing for my son, who is as far away from where we lived then as I was then. And I turned to leave him behind, and I could not keep the tears out of my eyes. So the sense of homelessness is always wrenching, even when the person leaving is supposed to leave, being shoved out of the nest. Some of you perhaps went off to the military, where they substitute your home in brutal fashion, but there it is. Getting married, even if you moved next door. And of course, there is the experience of spiritual homelessness, which is where I want to spend the bulk of my time this morning. But I want you to remember the visceral sense of being homeless.